There is a battle happening right now at the top of the global financial system that most people in the crypto community are watching from the wrong angle. They see China versus the dollar. They see BRICS versus SWIFT. They see geopolitical tension and they think about what it means for Bitcoin or for crypto broadly, and they completely miss the specific assets that were built to be the neutral solution to a problem that neither side of this battle can solve on their own. XRP, XLM, XBC, not because they are American assets, not because they are aligned with any political bloc, because they are neutral rails. And in a world where China, BRICS, and SWIFT are fighting over who controls the pipes, the only assets that benefit, regardless of who wins, are the ones that can serve every side simultaneously without being controlled by any of them. Let's go through exactly what is happening and why neutrality is the most valuable property in global payments right now. BRICS Pay will launch in 2026 to facilitate direct cross-border transactions in member countries' local currencies. Bypassing SWIFT and the US dollar, the platform aims to integrate existing national payment systems, Brazil's PICS, Russia's SPFS, China's CIPS, for faster, lower-cost transfers. BRICS Pay in 2026. That is this year, not a future plan, not a roadmap item. An announced 2026 launch for a payment system that integrates the national payment infrastructure of economies representing approximately 32% of global GDP and 45% of global population. And then there is China's move that happened with almost no Western media coverage. The BRICS bloc officially launched a new global payment system that enables more than 180 countries to conduct trade in Chinese currency, bypassing the US dollar entirely. 180 countries conducting trade in Chinese yuan through a system that runs parallel to SWIFT. And that system is operational right now, not announced, not planned, live. And SWIFT is not standing still. The November 2026 mandatory ISO 20022 deadline means every financial institution processing cross-border payments through SWIFT must have fully migrated to ISO 20022 structured messaging or face charges for using legacy MT format messages. SWIFT is racing to modernize its own infrastructure before the BRICS alternative captures enough volume to make the modernization irrelevant. 3 systems, 3 separate agendas, 3 different visions for who controls the future of global payments, and the problem that none of them can solve is the one that creates the opportunity for XRP, XLM, and XDC. The problem is interoperability. China's CIPS speaks Chinese yuan, Russia's SPFS speaks rubles, Brazil's PIX speaks reais, India's UPI speaks rupees, SWIFT speaks structured messaging in dollars and euros. BRICS Pay is trying to connect all of these into a coherent cross-border system, but connecting systems that speak different languages, carry different compliance standards, operate under different regulatory frameworks, and represent the interests of nations with fundamentally different geopolitical goals is not a software problem. It is a trust problem. Significant hurdles remain before BRICS has a fully operational payment rail that can serve as an alternative to SWIFT, among them legal harmonization and technical implementation, legal harmonization, technical implementation, and governance challenges. 3 separate categories of friction, and here is the specific insight that XRP, XLM, and XDC holders have understood, and most of the world has not. Those 3 categories of friction are exactly what ISO's 20022 compliance, atomic settlement, and neutral network architecture are designed to eliminate. Let's go through each asset and why the China Vs. BRICS versus SWIFT battle specifically validates its design. XRP first, and the specific property of XRP that makes it the most relevant neutral rail in this geopolitical context. When the White House official Patrick Witt stood at Consensus Miami and warned that if the U.S. doesn't write the rules, China will write them, He was talking about payment infrastructure. The CIPS expansion to 180 countries means China is already writing the rules for a significant portion of global cross-border payments. And the U.S. response to that expansion isn't building a competing government-controlled system. It's enabling private sector neutral rails through the regulatory framework that the Clarity Act and Genius Act create. XRP is the private sector neutral rail. The freezing of approximately $300 billion in Russian reserves following the outbreak of the Ukraine conflict reinforced concerns among many countries about potential vulnerabilities within the existing financial system. 300 billion frozen. That event is the single most important catalyst for BRICS payment system development. Every country that watched Russia's reserves get frozen in 2022 learned the same lesson. Dollar-denominated SWIFT infrastructure is a geopolitical weapon, and any country that relies exclusively on SWIFT for its international payment operations is exposed to that weapon. XRP's bridge currency function addresses exactly that concern. A Brazilian bank settling a trade with a Saudi counterpart does not need to go through dollar-denominated SWIFT infrastructure if both parties can settle atomically through XRP in 3 to 5 seconds. The transaction is not denominated in dollars. It is not crowded through U.S.-controlled infrastructure. It is neutral, and neutrality is the most valuable property in a world where $300 billion can be frozen overnight. Ripple has been actively expanding its ODL corridors across Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, regions where BRICS influence is growing and where SWIFT alternatives are most actively being developed. Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. These are the exact geographic regions where BRICS Pay is targeting its launch, and Ripple's ODL corridors are already operating in those regions. That is not a coincidence. It is evidence that the neutral rail thesis has been playing out in production while the geopolitical debate about BRICS versus SWIFT was still being framed as an either-or question. Now, XLM and the BRICS context reveals a dimension of the Stellar story that even most XLM holders have never articulated clearly before. BRICS Pay's stated objective is to serve member countries' local currencies directly, without requiring dollar conversion. The vision is a network where a Brazilian exporter can receive payment in reais from a Russian importer who sent rubles, with the conversion happening automatically at the settlement layer rather than requiring both parties to convert to dollars first. That architecture is exactly what Stellar's Anchor network and built-in decentralized exchange were designed to enable. Stellar can convert between any two currencies at the settlement layer. Automatically, a sender in one currency reaches a recipient in a completely different currency through a path that might involve XLM as a bridge or might find a direct currency pair with sufficient liquidity. No dollar conversion required, no SWIFT routing required, no correspondent banking intermediaries required. The BRICS countries are moving their focus from the ambitious goal of a shared BRICS currency to more feasible targets, such as increased bilateral trade in national currencies and their own payment systems. Bilateral trade in national currencies is the feasible target, and Stellar's architecture enables bilateral national the currency trade at a cost that neither SWIFT nor BRICS Pay can currently match. Oni's 20 million merchant network in Southeast Asia is already running this infrastructure in production. MoneyGram's Tier 1 validator status on Stellar means the world's largest remittance network is securing the blockchain that enables exactly the bilateral local currency payments that BRICS is trying to build a separate system to achieve. The DTCC's partnership with Stellar for tokenized security settlement targets the first half of 2027, but the BRICS context adds a dimension to this partnership that most analysis misses. When the DTCC tokenizes U.S. Treasuries on Stellar rails, Those tokenized treasuries become usable as collateral in cross-border transactions with BRICS-adjacent institutions that are already running payment infrastructure on Stellar. BRICS-adjacent institutions settling cross-border trades while U.S. treasuries are tokenized on the same network. That is the neutral rail thesis at its most concrete. Stellar serves both the Western institutional tokenization story through the DTCC and the emerging market bilateral currency and story through Aeon and MoneyGram, not because Stellar chose sides, because Stellar's architecture was designed for both simultaneously. Now XDC, and this is where the BRICS context produces the most underappreciated insight in this entire video. The BRICS bloc represents a significant portion of global trade finance. China alone processes more merchandise trade than any other country on Earth. Russia, India, Brazil, and South Africa collectively represent hundreds of billions of dollars in annual bilateral trade. And trade finance, the letters of credit, the documentary collections, the supply chain financing instruments that enable that trade is the most paper-intensive, most friction-laden, most expensive segment of international finance. XDC's hybrid blockchain architecture and ISO 2022 compliance make it specifically suited for the trade finance corridors that BRICS economies rely on. The $15 trillion trade finance gap, the amount of legitimate trade that goes unfinanced because documentation and settlement infrastructure is too slow and expensive, is concentrated in exactly the geographic regions where BRICS influence is strongest. $15 trillion trade finance gap concentrated in BRICS geographic regions, and XDC's Contour Network, partnerships with CIPS, HSBC, and Standard Chartered are building the blockchain-based trade finance infrastructure that reduces the documentation friction and settlement costs that currently makes that gap so large. XTC crossed $1 billion in tokenized assets on July 1st, 2026, with the network processing trade finance transactions across multiple BRICS adjacent corridors. $1 billion in tokenized assets with trade finance processing across BRICS adjacent corridors. XTC is not building a BRICS payment system. It is building the neutral trade finance infrastructure that serves BRICS trade corridors without being controlled by any BRICS member. And here is the specific tension that makes XTC's neutrality most valuable. China's CIPS is expanding to 180 countries, but CIPS is a Chinese-controlled system. Indian companies trading with Brazilian counterparts do not necessarily want to route their transactions through Chinese-controlled infrastructure any more than they want to route them through US-controlled SWIFT infrastructure. The geopolitical rivalry within BRICS itself, particularly between China and India, creates demand for genuinely neutral trade finance infrastructure that neither CIPS nor SWIFT can provide. XDC provides that, a hybrid public-private blockchain for trade finance that is not controlled by the US, not controlled by China, not controlled by Russia, and not controlled by any BRICS member. It is governed by its community with institutional validators, including Certec, Deutsche Telekom, and SBI Holdings, which spans the neutral territory between Western and BRICS institutional worlds. Now, let's put the complete picture together, because the China vs. BRICS vs. SWIFT battle is not creating a single winner. It is creating a fragmented global payment landscape where multiple systems coexist, and the friction between them is the pain that neutral rails eliminate. While a complete alternative to SWIFT is unlikely to emerge in the near term, analysts believe the trajectory is becoming increasingly clear. BRICS members are laying the foundations for a parallel financial architecture that could gradually reshape cross-border payments and expand the role of local currencies in international trade over the coming decade. A parallel financial architecture, not a replacement, a parallel system, and parallel systems create interoperability problems. When a SWIFT using European bank needs to settle a transaction with a CIPS using Chinese counterpart, neither system provides a native bridge. When a BRICS Pay using Brazilian exporter needs to receive payment from a SWIFT using Japanese importer, the currency conversion and settlement path is fragmented, and an expensive XRP bridges those gaps at the currency conversion and settlement layer. XLM bridges them at the bilateral local currency payment layer. XDC bridges them at the trade finance documentation and PI settlement layer. All three are neutral. All three are ISO 20022 compatible. All three operate without requiring either party to route through infrastructure controlled by a geopolitical competitor. The battle between China, BRICS, and SWIFT is not a zero-sum competition where one system wins and the others disappear. It is an escalating fragmentation where every new parallel system creates more interoperability problems that neutral rails are uniquely positioned to solve. You have been holding XRP, XLM, and XDC through years of geopolitical uncertainty. Through the Russia sanctions, through the BRICS expansion announcements, through the CIPS expansion to 180 countries, through every headline that made it seem like the global financial system was fracturing along geopolitical lines. And what the fracturing actually created is the largest possible demand for neutral settlement infrastructure in the history of global payments. Not despite the geopolitical battle, because of it, the neutral rails were right all along. And the China vs. BRICS vs. SWIFT battle just confirmed it at a scale that even the most optimistic XRP, XLM, and XTC holder could not have predicted in 2022. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing here constitutes financial, legal, or investment advice. Always do your own research and consult qualified professionals before making any financial decisions. If this video gave you the complete geopolitical framework that explains why the China vs. BRICS vs. SWIFT battle validates XRP, XLM, and XDC specifically, rather than crypto broadly, hit the like button right now. That signal pushes this to holders who understand the technology without having seen the geopolitical context connected to it clearly in one place. Subscribe, because when BRICS Pay formally launches later this year, and the interoperability problems between BRICS, CIPS, and SWIFT become documented and measurable, this channel will show you exactly how neutral rail transaction volume responds. And drop a comment with this. Out of XRP, XLM, and XTC, which one do you think benefits most from the BRICS payment fragmentation specifically, and why? That debate requires understanding the geopolitical context and the institutional pipeline simultaneously, and the answer reveals exactly where this community's analysis is deepest. Share this with whoever in your circle is watching the BRICS vs. SWIFT story without understanding which assets are positioned as the neutral solution to the problem both sides are creating. The battle validates the rails, and you already hold them. Have a great day. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to join my free Telegram community with the link on my channel where I post my daily crypto experience and arbitrage opportunities you can't get anywhere else. This is XRP Hobart signing off.